Welcome, everybody. I see people filing in. All right. Well, we're almost just about at time. So how about I begin the introductions and so forth. Welcome, everyone, to The Torch of Progress. This is the speaker series for our online learning program, Progress Studies for Young Scholars, which you can find at progressstudies.school is the website. Progress Studies for Young Scholars is an online learning program in the history of technology aimed at high school ages and up. We are aiming at teenagers right now, but soon we'll have an offering for adults as well. So if you are interested in the history of progress, then and even if you're older than teens, go ahead and sign up, and we're going to have something for you soon. Before we dive into today's event, I just want to tell you about a couple of other upcoming ones that are scheduled. Next week on Wednesday, July 22nd at 10 a.m. Pacific, we're going to have Anton Howes, the author of the recent book, Arts and Minds, A History of Britain's Royal Society for Arts. And after that, on Wednesday, July 29th, also 10 a.m. Pacific, Danica Ramey, the president of the Asteroid Institute, is going to join us and give a talk on asteroids and how we can protect the Earth from asteroid impacts, which is the mission of the Institute. I am your host, Jason Crawford. I write the website, The Roots of Progress, which you can find at rootsofprogress.org, about the history of technology and the philosophy of human progress. And with me today is Noor Siddiqui, who is the co-founder and CEO of Orchid Bioscience, which we'll be talking a little bit today. So thank you and welcome, Noor.
Thanks so much for having me, Jason. I think that what you're doing is extremely impressive. So I'm super honored to be here and to join you guys today.
Great, thanks. Well, it's great to have you. So we'll do an interview for about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to the audience for questions. As always, we'll be prioritizing questions from our enrolled students, which you all can find that in the class Slack. Anyone else, feel free to ask questions in the chat as we go along, and we'll get to them towards the end. So this is the first time we've actually had someone come on this speaker series who's actually we're interviewing about kind of the frontier of technology. I was about to say first founder. You're not the first founder because we brought Patrick Collison on, but I actually didn't talk to him about Stripe. And we spent the whole time talking about progress studies instead, since obviously that's one of his interests. But Noor, I brought you on because you're at the frontier of an exciting area of technology in genetics. And also because you've just had such an interesting kind of life story and educational, history and a somewhat non-conventional path, which I always think is interesting and love to explore. So would love to we'll spend about the first half of this talking about your sort of educational and career path, and then maybe we can get into genetics and some of the interesting things on the frontier.
Cool.
This is going to be a little less scripted than some of the previous ones where I wrote down a bunch of questions in advance, and I'm going to just sort of improvise a little bit. So we'll just have a conversation. Since we've got so many of the audience and our students are in high school, let's just start there. What was your high school experience like?
Yeah. So I grew up in Northern Virginia, like the suburbs of Washington, D.C. And I went to a public high school called Robinson Secondary. I was in an IB program. And I think just like everyone else, my dream was, to go to college. My parents' dreams for me had always been to go to college. And then I found out about the Teal fellowship when I was, about 17. And it was basically love at first sight. It was like, I had never been presented with an option like this. And as soon as I saw this option, I was like, this is the option that I definitely want. And, obviously I thought that there was like zero chance of me, getting accepted to this thing, zero chance of my parents, being okay with it or much less excited about it. But I just sort of applied in secret anyways, kind of against their guidance and wishes. And then, I was super fortunate to get a chance to interview. And then the interview also was sort of solidified my, my initial excitement about it. I just met this group of people that was I had such synchrony with. I was just like, oh, these are like people who are super optimistic about building things, and already have had this like cool track record of making stuff. And just I didn't have that. I didn't have that group of friends where I grew up. I think most people, like their ambition was to go into government, into law, into medicine, like pretty like conventional and tracked career paths. So it was really, really exciting for me to meet people my age and also people older than me who were doing all of the basically who were following through on their dreams and their ambitions. And then
for people who don't know about it, just tell people, what exactly is the Teal Fellowship?
Sure. Yeah. So the Teal Fellowship is a grant, a 100K grant from Peter Teal to basically work on an idea, usually a company, for 2 years. And the condition of the funding is that you focus full time on the company. So that means you can't be in school at the same time. So it was, I think, very controversial in 2012, much less controversial in 2020. I think that it was kind of like, breaking the 4-minute mile, where no one broke the 4-minute mile. And then, the first person got that through 59, and then very quickly within the same year 4 or 5 other people broke 4 minutes. I think there was this huge psychological barrier before, around in 2012 2011 timeframe, where the only path after high school was college. And I think that since then the fellowship, and I think it spawned a lot of other sort of programs, or basically copycats, I guess, who are helping like further this idea that the only path after high school isn't college. It's also following through on a company, or following through on research, or I think Obama's daughter, she took a gap year to travel, do military service. I think it's just become more normalized to do something else besides college immediately after high school.
Yeah. And so did you already have, were you already interested in being a founder in entrepreneurship in high school? Did you even have a business that you wanted to start? Or what was your disposition towards that when you heard about it?
So in high school, I was actually working on a nonprofit. So I was really focused on, I had this very jarring experience, I think about 12 or 13, where a kid from suburbia goes to Pakistan, where my parents grew up, and had this very quintessential experience of like coming face to face with extreme poverty. So I was just like playing in the street with a girl my age, like I think we were like playing soccer or something. And, my parents came out of the store, and then she asked me for money, and I just started breaking down crying, because I didn't know that she didn't have parents, and that, that was what was going on. And I think after that experience, I just felt this enormous amount of responsibility to do something, because just growing up in suburbia, I never saw that type of wealth disparity, or the idea that someone who I could get along with so quickly wouldn't have parents, or wouldn't have access to any of the things that I did. So I started a nonprofit with a group of friends at other high schools across where I grew up in Northern Virginia, and we just focused on basically raising money to get grants for different high potential youth, kind of like, I guess, a super mini version of the Teal Fellowship, like less impressive version, where we were just finding young people through like NGOs distributing applications to find high potential youth in sort of like under resourced areas, and then connecting them to some capital and mentorship. So that was there was one specific applicant who was successful in Afghanistan, who like really stood out to me. She her father and brother died, and she was taken care of by her mom. And because she was living in Afghanistan, there was just a huge amount of discrimination against them. Like they were constantly being evicted from their housing, or the rent was being doubled or tripled, because they were saying that, oh, you guys are prostitutes, or basically making up false claims against them. And that really affected her educational trajectory. So anyways, long story short, we were able to sort of connect her with credible mentorship, and a couple of things that allowed her to sort of make her housing a little bit more stable, and her schooling and like tutoring more stable. And she's just been doing really well. And that was the story that I was especially excited about. I think the line that I remember from her application was that she said that she wanted to grow up to be a judge in Afghanistan, to reform the laws that were preventing her and her mom from like competing equally. And I thought that was a just, yeah, insanely courageous thing for someone in her position to feel, because I think if that were me, I would have felt, yeah, just super powerless and just super, caught in a corner. So yeah, that's probably the case that I was most proud of. But yeah, so
Yeah, wow.
I guess long story short, I entered the Teal Fellowship, Silicon Valley, with a completely, I guess, different background, I think, than most other fellows. Most other fellows sort of like were like midway through college, like their sophomore, maybe some of them their junior year, had like interned at a couple of tech companies, had products, had like been interested in video games or like software their whole life. And yeah, that definitely wasn't me. So when I entered, it was sort of this whole new world of, oh, you can like build a product in your garage and like scale it to millions or billions of people, and like these crazy people called VCs will like give you funding to do this. So it was definitely a huge culture shock. Yeah, from DC, and seeing people like very focused on credentials and
Yeah.
yeah, which, do you work for this like large company? Yeah, it was a very, very different uh, different environment to step
Yeah.
into.
Yeah. So did it feel, how did it feel to take like a highly non-conventional path? Was it uncomfortable? Was it frightening? Uh, what were psychologically, what did you have to deal
Yeah,
with
I think
there?
it's really funny because people always say this. They always ask, what was I scared? And it was actually, it did not feel like a brave choice at all. It felt like this is the extremely obvious thing that would be better for me to do than college. Um, I don't know. It's funny because people always ask, did I feel scared? And there was literally zero. There was zero fear. And I don't mean that from like a bravery standpoint. I just mean it from like oh, here are my two options. Like I can go do what everyone else is going to do and has like a very, um, defined outcome, or I can go do this like really weird thing, which has like a completely undefined outcome. And to me, like the option of doing the fellowship was just immediately more exciting, and was also more directed. I mean, what I always wanted to do was to like learn how to build things that helped people. I think the initial a manifestation of that was this nonprofit, and then after seeing, sort of where nonprofits break, they have issues with acquiring talent because they can't pay enough. They have issues with sustainability. Yeah, that's when I just got more excited about building companies, and not being so afraid of turning a profit, and seeing how the profit motive can actually help scale and make things make things bigger and better than sometimes a nonprofit can. I mean, what I was working on initially was basically a platform to help people learn and earn money at the same time. And if you think about like works programs, like what is the company that employs the most people, right? Like Amazon and Walmart employ millions of people, right? So a lot of these nonprofits that are working on ways to basically teach a man to fish, like create work for people. I mean, if you take that to the if you look at who's been the most successful at that, it's these large profit generating companies, right? It's not nonprofits. So I think some of that just made it more clear to me that if I really wanted to have a large impact, help a lot of people, like a really good way to measure and to know whether you're helping someone is, do they want to pay you for what you're doing? And a really good way to be able to get the best people is to be working on something that is working on something new and unusual that like has technical challenges in it, that has some degree of market risk. Those are the types of problems that really talented people are going to be attracted to and want to jump into.
Yeah. So just going back to the question a bit, in terms of, it's really interesting to me, and yet not surprising, that it felt totally natural to you to go take an alternate path. I think some people are just like that, but I don't think that that's the maybe dominant or majority kind of attitude. I think more typical would be to be concerned about it. I'm curious, do you have any insight? What do you think is different about your mentality, psychology, or just the way you think that made it feel completely natural to you to go do this completely unorthodox thing?
I don't know. It's actually so funny. I feel like people often ask me, what makes you different, and I actually don't think I'm that different than other people. I think that I feel like there's always this sort of like founder mysticism, or grandiosity that people inject onto people. And I think everyone has this like excitement. I think everyone has dreams. Everyone, you know, if you talk to them, there's like certain things that they light up about. And I think it's just a matter of maybe how seriously they take them. And for me, I just feel like I was really lucky that I saw these sparks, these examples of other people going after their dreams and succeeding. And I think that maybe that was the difference for me. So for me, at this really young, impressionable age of 17, I was able to get exposure to, you know, all these people who are just like basically just going after their dreams, no matter like how ridiculous and crazy they sounded. And I think that seeing so many people both fail, you know, multiple times at doing that and then succeeding, or just continually failing or continually succeeding, just made me just opened the door to the opportunity. I think a lot of it is just mimetic, right? It's just being able to see an example of someone else doing something. It's like, hey, yeah, I could do that, right? And yeah, I don't know.
Sometimes you only need one example. It could be 99% of the world going one way, but if you see one example of somebody doing a different thing, it gives you the idea.
Yeah, I think it's just the idea. I mean, if you have these blinders on, which I did all through, you know, school, which is, hey, I'm going to go to college and I'm going to be a lawyer because I'm going to be an engineer and a lawyer because, you know, my dad's an engineer and a lawyer. And I think that that's cool. I'm sure it's still cool that he does that, but yeah, I just didn't realize that there were so many like other things that I could do. So yeah, I think just getting that exposure and but yeah, it was probably what it was for me. I mean, I don't know. I think I just like adventure. I just think that the cooler thing to do is like one that has like more uncertainty, I guess. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like you're the same way. So
in some ways, yeah. I mean, this interview isn't about me, but I dropped out of high school halfway through to basically just like teach myself for 2 years. Then I did the more conventional thing, and I went to college kind of on the normal schedule. But yeah, it's like I said, it's just interesting. I think there's just some people who aren't at all worried about doing the unconventional thing, and it's curious. So okay, let's move on just a little bit. So you did the Teal Fellowship. You started a company before Orchid, right? So this was Remedy.
Yeah.
So tell just a little bit about the Remedy story and maybe what are some of the lessons learned coming out of that.
Yeah, so cool. So Remedy was software for doctors to help them communicate with each other. So we started out on Google Glass, building basically a video collaboration tool that allowed surgeons to monitor nurses who were kind of doing like wound care or different things that required monitoring. And yeah, I think like the product like ended up iterating a million different ways. Google Glass ended up not being the platform that we wanted to work with. Because the device is actually like heating up too fast on nurses' faces, like burning the side of their faces. So video streaming is obviously pretty you know, intensive. So yeah, we ended up moving to like a mobile product, and I think like the main learnings from Remedy, the first company, was like, you know, how to raise money, how to build a product, how to build a team, how to like actually get paid in a healthcare environment. I think that we probably made a mistake for like at least 6 months to a year of like just assuming that whatever doctors wanted, people would pay for. Doctors often like don't have a budget. There's often enormous amount of red tape in hospitals, like year-long purchase processes. So actually navigating and figuring out, okay, like who are the entities who can pay for a thing? Who are the entities that benefit from a thing? And yeah, it's kind of funny because I think I look at a lot of digital health companies today, and I feel like, yeah, the first year is just making this mistake that you know, just because you make something that someone uses, it's not a consumer product where like the consumer can just pay for it. There's like this weird geometry that you have to navigate of like, okay, who actually like, has the purse strings? Okay, one entity who has the ability to sign the contract, and then like is your thing useful enough that they want to, you know, sign again over a year, or is it just this like point solution that solves them in this, you know, really this really sporadic or ephemeral amount of time. So yeah, I think the first year we were basically just like following, you know, surgeons and doctors around and like building whatever they said they wanted to build, prototyping it, and then sort of learning slowly that, okay, just because this like succeeded in a study doesn't mean that this is you know, a good thing to build on the company side, like, yeah, just in terms of how quickly we could sign. But yeah, I guess we're working forward maybe 2 or 3 years into the company, we were able to solve a lot of those problems, but I think my inevitable decision to go to school was just about, long-term impact. I just thought about, I was constantly getting this question of like, oh, like, do you want this to be your life's work? And like reflecting on that, and like, obviously thinking that what we were doing was important, was helping patients, but just reflecting and thinking, and that, no, like the thing that I really want my life's work to be is, more in the realm of what Orchid is doing, and that I didn't feel like I had the research experience or the technical expertise to go execute on that. And I just had this gut feeling of, just because, I've done a bunch of work here doesn't mean that this is necessarily the biggest thing that I'm going to build. And it was kind of this other moment where like everyone was saying, it was actually funny. My parents had done a reversal where now that the company was doing better, they were thinking, oh, it doesn't make sense to go to college. Like you're wasting all this work that you put in. So they went from like saying you should go to college, not take the Teal fellowship, to saying like, don't go to college, continue with the company. But yeah, I think it was just a gut feeling. I was like, this is cool. I feel really proud of myself for having built this from zero. But at the same time, I knew that what I wanted my life's work to be was something different, and I needed to go spend some focused time, both meeting the experts in the field, understanding the problem better, and like building my own expertise. So yeah, in 2015, I decided to go to Stanford, and so from 2015 to 2019, I did my undergrad and master's in computer science formally, but you spent a lot of time in genomics as well. Mm-hmm. And then, enter Orchid. I started that at the end of 2019, and we're working on that we've just been building since.
Cool. Okay, great. I want to hear all about that. Before we leave kind of maybe the, sort of educational and career path and life lessons, there's a question that I typically save to the end, but it fits so naturally in here that I'll just ask it now, which is, what advice that is commonly given to teenagers or that you heard as a teenager, do you think is actually wrong?
I think actually a lot of advice. So there's actually a lot. So I think one is, these are actually not, I have to give the caveat that they're not all original for me. I've actually just picked these up from other people, and I was like, oh yeah, that's actually really smart. So one thing that's really cool is that the Teal Fellowship actually lets us interview the new fellows, like we give some input onto like who gets selected. And one really smart thing that I noticed that an applicant did this year was he was saying that, I didn't think that I was good enough to get an internship at one of like this sexy Silicon Valley companies like, Google or whatever, OpenAI or something. So he's like, so instead of that, I went and took an internship at like the dumbest possible company, right? Like this old industry that has like no software, and then just tried to learn everything about like, why is this process so shitty? I can't even remember what it was because it was so boring, but it was like something in like manufacturing. And I don't even remember. It was literally so arcane and boring that I can't even remember like the 3 words that he used to describe it. But I actually think that that's a brilliant idea. Like if you're someone who's like really smart and like wants to build things, why not be like a big fish in a small pond? Why not like go to some like terrible, horribly backward industry and then just observe how they do things, and then be the only person like in the entire space who understands idiosyncrasies to be able to like modernize it, like build a new like software product or whatever it is to make that to make that space that no other like engineers are thinking about better, right? Because I mean, the most natural thing that like engineers build, right, is like developer tools or games, and there's like so much competition there, or like a social app or a consumer app, and like it's just really hard to compete there. And you can just take a playbook from Peter Thiel and say like competition is for losers, and just go where no one else is looking. And these older slow to modernize industries, like they're also going to be begging for like a high schooler or early college student in their career to join, because they probably don't have very much new blood, right? They're probably no one wants to help them. No one wants to join, right? So it's actually like this weird like asymmetry where like they really want you to be there. You get to learn a lot. You get to actually build a product that you can have like insider knowledge, secret knowledge that no one else has. So I think that's actually a really good shortcut to like if you want to like build something impactful and have a lot of adoption. It's like actually go work someplace really, really bad instead of someplace traditionally seen as really, really good.
It's an interesting idea and an interesting kind of bet. I mean, on the one hand, it seems that you would like the biggest risk in my mind is that you would actually almost certainly end up with like no mentorship,
Mhm.
and you would not be kind of like growing in a great work environment. On the other hand, if you like, I can see the benefit of going in and getting expertise in some niche industry, or maybe even a very important but very obscure industry that then gives you a competitive advantage in figuring out actually how should this entire industry be disrupted with software. Uh, the last company that I worked at before I went full time
Exactly.
on
I feel like you
progress
have to talk about
studies,
Flexport right now. It's
yeah,
like a perfect intro for Flexport.
was Flexport, and Flexport is, Ryan Peterson's founder of Flexport, and he was able to do that company because he had experience as an importer and with, really obscure things. I mean, not obscure in the grand scheme. I mean, obviously lots of people know, but things that an average consumer would not run into, like customs duties and
Yeah.
how difficult and complicated is it to, to calculate your customs duties or to do the logistics of importing. And so, yeah, when you go into some of these industries, and this is, I think, where maybe a lot of the remaining opportunities are for the next decade or two in software, is in kind of like going into some industries that are not as well known to the general public or to the average consumer, and that haven't really been revamped by software, and then going in and figuring out how to fix them, like logistics and insurance and all sorts of things that kind of sound boring on the face of them, but if you're willing to kind of get into the details and geek out about it a bit, it can actually be a fascinating problem to solve.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think basically like at every stage of your life, you have certain advantages and disadvantages. And like as a young person, you shouldn't over index on your disadvantages, right? So what is your disadvantage as a young person? You don't have experience, you don't have a network, right? But what you do have is fresh eyes. And that's actually like surprisingly valuable. So like as a young person, don't over focus on like, oh, this other person has more experience than me. They're like a big network. You should focus on like, hey, well, I'm more of a blank slate. I can sort of just think, how would I want this thing to work, right? How would other people like me, like my generation, want this thing to work, want this whole industry to work, and then go build that. And then obviously, like when you're later in your career, then you can flex your network and you can flex your experience, and there's positives and negatives to that. So I think as a young person, at least I remember feeling really this like heavy burden of like, oh, I don't have this experience, and how is that damaging to me? At least I guess I'm still pretty young, but at 17 it felt even more this I don't know, I guess anxiety about it, which I think was completely misplaced. Like it's actually it's like a huge benefit in a lot of cases. So I think just looking for those asymmetries where is like a just like a fresh take, or like the like desire to like learn quickly, where is that going to be really useful and really leveraged, I think is what I would say my advice is.
Yeah, I think you're right about focusing on your strengths. When you're young, what you lack in experience and maturity, you can make up for with energy and enthusiasm. And then, as you get older, it turns out you start to lose your total amount of energy, and so you need to make up for that with increased experience and maturity as you go on.
Yeah,
There was
I think
I
yeah,
was just gonna quote
go ahead.
Steve Blank, who said that the older he gets, the less he's able to make a red eye flight to go visit a customer and make a sales call, but also the better his judgment gets about when does he really need to get on that red eye flight.
Yeah, exactly. That's so true. Yeah, I mean, I've noticed even in like a super short amount of time, the way like my judgment about people and things like that has improved. Which, yeah, I never would have guessed. But I mean, I think the other thing about being young that's a huge advantage is just that I don't know how to phrase this, but basically that I think as you get older, you have this I guess embarrassment that comes a lot easier. Like think about like an infant, right? An infant is willing to make infinite mistakes, like has basically literally no filter on what they're going to do. They're just going to go explore literally everything, and everything is brand new. And I think as we get older, we have this I don't know, this like anxiety or this like desire just to appear competent to other people that starts closing doors, that starts saying like, oh, I can't like go be a novice at this thing because I'm an expert at this thing, and this like expectation that, oh, I have to immediately have a certain level of competence to even enter the room. And I think that that's a terrible thing that happens to people that I like definitely don't want to happen to me, but I can already see sort of happening in small ways. And I think that that's a huge advantage that young people have that's like really underhyped, underrealized, is that, hey, you can like walk into like, hey, you want to go be a physicist, you want to go be a biologist, you want to go be an engineer, you want to be a dancer, whatever it is, like people will entertain you to like go gain expertise in that. And then as you get older, yeah, you're just less willing to step outside of your lane. And yeah, that's just a really dangerous thing, I think, to let creep into your life.
Yeah, interesting. When it comes to potential or capacity for embarrassment, for me personally, I feel like that peaked in my teenage years.
Oh, really?
Right. and then was a little lower, but still high in my 20s, and then significantly lower in my 30s. And I just try to lower it all the time.
Yeah.
Until, now it's very difficult for me to be embarrassed, although not impossible. But yeah, no, that's a good insight. We're getting a little ways into the hour, so let's shift gears. I would love to talk about genetics.
Yeah.
Now I know Orchid still hasn't announced many details about its product, but what can you tell us about what it's doing at this point?
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so Orchid's mission is to help couples have the healthiest child possible. So the way that we do that is we're going to be announcing a set of products that help parents mitigate genetic diseases that they may carry genetic predispositions for. So I can't get into too much of the details, but that's sort of like the general focus of what we're working on. And I think that there's just been so many like, incredible advancements with IVF or with reproductive technology. So IVF stands for in vitro fertilization, and this is the ability to basically help infertile couples. So 15% of couples are end up being infertile, helping those couples actually have children. So the way that they do that is they extract eggs from the woman's ovaries. They take some sperm, fertilize that egg, and create embryos in a lab. And then those embryos grow a couple of days, and there's this really amazing like laser that you can use, that embryologists can use to grab a few cells off of those embryos, and then that those few cells can be used to actually gather genetic information on that embryo. So basically, a day 5-year-old human embryo, however you want to call it, 100 cells. You can find out, does it carry a mutation? Does it carry is it likely to have something, some debilitating condition when that child is born? So it's a really amazing industry that I think is extremely underhyped. It's only 40 years old, but there's been 8 million IVF babies born around the world since then, about 500,000 per year. So one in 20 babies have been born through IVF in Japan, 1 in 10 in Copenhagen, like over 200 million are projected to be born over the coming decades. So, women are choosing to have, to have children later. That obviously, means that they're, more likely to end up in the IVF clinic. So it's just this really exciting time, this really interesting convergence between the advances that have happened in reproductive medicine that allow these embryos to be grown in a lab, them to be cryopreserved or frozen, and then thawed and implanted into the mother years or in a more sci-fi case, decades later. So basically, there's been this huge amount of advancement in reproductive medicine, and there's also been this huge advancement on the computational biology, molecular biology, statistical genetics side that allows that information to actually be interpreted. So it wasn't possible before to be able to gather such high resolution genetic information on such a small sample. There's a whole host of sort of technical problems there. And
yeah, I was going to ask about that. I'd love to go into that. I mean, so in order to do this, they have to literally be able to essentially sequence, correct me if I'm wrong, but sequence the DNA from like a single cell, which seems kind of amazing. Like, how do they do that?
Correct. Yeah. So, I mean, that's been, more than 10 or 20 years of a bunch of really smart scientists' work, is to figure out, so many things had to happen, right? Like it had to, we had to sequence the human genome, right? That would happen in 2000. That was, a multi-billion-dollar project. It took, I think, yeah, it took many hundreds of collaborators around the world to make happen. So we sequenced the human genome, and then the interpretation process has taken well over 20 years, right? So it's 2020 now, and there's still so much we don't know about the human genome, right? So we have just we have 20,000 genes. When we originally sequenced the human genome, we were expecting to have we didn't know anything as basic as how many genes are in our genome. We expected to have like 3 or 4 times the number that we actually discovered, because there's around 20,000 genes in much simpler species that we had sequenced before, and the best scientists in the world thought that humans certainly must have like 60,000 or 100,000 genes, right? So that was like the first surprise, is that we didn't even have a map. We didn't even have like the most basic bearings of like, what are we gonna find here? So we found these 20,000 genes, and then we're like, okay, so what do they do? How do they work? Are they broken? And it's just like this very methodical and slow step-by-step process to actually understand what's going on. And still obviously so much is undiscovered, but we do have these like really beautiful and impressive examples of situations like SMA, spinal muscular atrophy, where this is like a condition that generally kills a child by age 2. Is a very severe condition that we've actually developed a gene therapy for. So that gene therapy costs about $1 to $2 million, which is, it's really unfortunate to see some parents having to crowdfund that money just to pay for the therapy. But basically, since 1992, IVF has been preventing the conditions that gene therapy will only one day treat, since 1992, for $20,000 a case, as opposed to $2 million a case. So basically, once you've identified what gene or what segment of DNA is broken or is causing this very severe condition, trying to fix it in a child or an adult is much more expensive clinical validation process. You basically design a vector to be able to actually go take that broken gene and repair it and fix it and insert a functioning gene that's going to produce the protein that doesn't result in this condition being so debilitating for a child or for an adult. So it's basically the process of actually developing a therapy is extremely involved, right? It costs on the order of $1 billion, a huge amount of effort for pharma companies to be able to pull off, versus if you're able to screen embryos or couples for being carriers for this condition. IVF allows you to prevent that for a much lower cost, right? You just have to be able to detect the embryos that are going to result in the this pathogenic mutation, as opposed to the ones that don't carry it.
Yeah. So what are some of the other scientific and technological challenges that are kind of on the frontier, right now related to this kind of thing?
Yeah, so there's basically the statistical genetic side. So basically, when you have hundreds of thousands, millions of people sequenced, how do you figure out which portions of the genome matter, which portions of the genome are going to confer increased risks, versus which sections of the genome are going to be protective for any given condition? So that actually varies across populations. So one huge challenge is that we have a very biased data set. We have a data set of predominantly people of European ancestry, and the informative markers actually change by ancestry. So we have this huge problem of, okay, given the fact that the data is biased, how do we make these risk scores as performative or as useful for different ancestries? That's like a really open and active research area. I guess maybe one level up is just even on the people of European ancestry, people who we do have a lot of data on, how do we make these predictors more robust? How do we make them more predictive for a given condition? So I guess that's on the statistical genetic side. Then on the molecular biology side, you basically have all this chemistry that you can look into for how do you make how do you get the most uniform, high fidelity genetic data off of a really small sample. So you typically, when you're sequencing, you have like blood or saliva, where you have a lot of DNA that you can isolate. And basically, if you have a lot of DNA, it makes like the entire process simpler. So if you're really constrained with having, a single cell or a few cells, how do you adapt that process? How do you build new tools in order to sequence from such a small starting sample?
Yeah, so my understanding, I only halfway understand, or maybe 10% of the way understand how DNA sequencing works. But my understanding is you get a bunch of copies of the DNA. You end up chopping them up into shorter strands that are maybe 500 nucleotides or something, and then there's a chemical process to sequence those. But then you have to piece the whole thing together using a computer, right? Using a program to kind of find overlapping segments. But if you only are starting with a single cell, you're only starting with one copy of the gene. So now you can't find those overlapping sequences. So how does this even work with a single cell?
Yeah. So the key part is like the amplification process. So you're exactly right. I mean, that is, is the high level of how it works. So yeah, even when you have like blood or saliva, you often use PCR. So yeah, a technique to amplify or like make more copies of the DNA in order to make the rest of the process work. So
Got it.
basically,
Okay.
there's a huge problem, when you have a single cell of, how do you amplify in an unbiased way, right? Because basically, that's basically where a lot of techniques go wrong. Is that basically, since you have such a small starting sample, it's really easy to screw that up, to basically not amplify uniformly, so that you're getting, you're basically missing entire regions that you need. So luckily, there's been a lot of interest in this space because of cancer genomics. So basically tumor profiling. So basically, in order to develop personalized therapies for cancer, lots of scientists have been really interested in, let's do like single cell sequencing, not just of DNA, but of RNA, of proteome. Let me understand basically everything about the mechanics of what's going on in order to develop a personalized therapy for you. I think that interest, that those billions of dollars of funding have definitely yielded results. And fortunately, there's like a lot of transfer value to being able to sequence a small sample, not just in a tumor biopsy, but also in a single cell off of an embryo.
Got it. Interesting. Okay, great. So so today we're able to do genetic screening. What are the challenges between where we are today and being able to safely and effectively actually edit the human genome?
Yeah. So editing is a very exciting is a very exciting process. But I mean, it's basically it's all around like safety, like what's medically responsible. So one of the issues with editing is this thing called off-target effects. So the idea that when you cut one portion of the genome, so basically the way you can think about this is like string matching. So like, let's say you have like cat, the word cat, and you want to, you guys probably like experience this, right? Like, let's say you have an essay and you're trying to like change every occurrence of a certain word. You're like looking for where you put whatever the word cat, and you're trying to replace it with the word dog. So sometimes when you do that, it ends up getting partial matches. I can't think of a word that has cat in it, but basically there's certain words that maybe have, I don't know, I'm trying to think, like maybe you're trying to get rid of the word bear and you have like brown bear, and then that one you actually wanted to keep. So basically that's what's happening in the genome. You have this enzyme that's cutting this like specific location, but if you don't have enough like flanking regions that basically make your grep command, or however you want to think about it, work properly, you end up messing with regions that you don't want to. So that's like one of the big issues that folks are trying to develop. Folks are trying to make more precise and have fewer off-target effects. The other issue with a lot of this stuff is delivery. So basically, how do you get this vector? How do you get this like cutting machinery inside the cell of interest and not outside of the cell of interest? So you can
That should be easier with embryos, though, I would think, right? I mean, you have so few cells and they're kind of right there.
Oh, I actually think it might be hardest with embryos. So the
Oh,
reason
why?
why is because an embryo is in a very, very interesting, precious state, right? So it's like totipotent, right? Meaning, so it's like this is in this state where you have a few cells that are going to become every cell in the body, right? That are going to become lung cells, heart cells, brain cells. So it's we really don't understand really what's like how this process. We understand something about how this process works, but there's a lot that we don't understand about. Basically, how do these cells figure out how to differentiate into, basically, how do these cell lineages form? How does this population of cells know to become brain cells at this specific point versus this population of cells know to become lung cells? That process of lineage separation, lineage differentiation is, we've obviously been studying it for a long time, but it's not completely understood. So yeah, the idea of creating a germline mutation, so basically a mutation that affects affects cells that are passed on across generations is I would say probably not ready for prime time. But I think, within 100, 200, I don't know how long you want to say, like that is something that's going to become possible. But today, from the technical perspective, I would say that it's pretty difficult. There has been some early studies in basically non-viable embryos to see like what the efficacy was. And I think many of the problems are kind of the ones that we discussed, is basically that it's hard to actually cut the regions that you want. And then even if you are able to cut the regions that you want, there's sometimes damage or like misincorporation at other sites.
Yeah. When we think about curing genetic diseases through some sort of gene therapy, gene editing, is that typically the sort of thing where you actually need to change the genome of most or all the cells in the body? Or is it the sort of thing where it would actually be more targeted, like you have a bone disease and you only have to change the genome of the bone cells?
Yeah, so it's really variable disease by disease. So there's not really any like generalizations I can say, but it's essentially like for some conditions like for like a blood-based condition, or for like basically for each specific disease, there's really different techniques that would be required. So the types of diseases that are most amenable to gene therapy are ones that are very localized. Basically, the first gene therapy that was approved in the US is called Luxturna. So this was for a form of macular degeneration called retinitis pigmentosa. So it basically degenerates the retina. And the reason why that was a good target was because basically the eye is like this confined region, right? It's a like viral vector that is injected right into the retina and is able to repair a broken non-functioning gene in the retina, and basically there's basically a whole host of problems that come up with like delivery of these viral vectors. And the eye and the blood are typically the easiest to get to, for example, and the brain is probably one of the most difficult to get to. So I think like the two big problems to solve are definitely around like delivery of these vectors and misincorporation. So the ability to like safely target a specific region and not attack or cause issues in other parts of the genome.
Mm-hmm. All right. I would love to keep asking you questions about biology for hours, but we're getting towards the end of the hour, and I'd love to turn to some of the questions from our students and from the audience in general. So let me do that. The students have been sending me questions through the Slack. So let's see. A question from Juan David. What are your thoughts, he asks, about sort of getting the foundation of a company in place and working on a project or a company? And in particular, he points out Patrick Collison, when we talked to him, had advice that we should be wary of starting something too early. He actually advised maybe take a little extra time to kind of figure out what you really want to devote the long term to. So what's your advice?
I don't know. I think it's hard to give opposing advice to Patrick, because Patrick's obviously crushing at Stripe. But I think my bias would be to start something as early as possible. I don't think that's true. I mean, Patrick started so many different companies and from such a young age. So I don't know why he's saying that. What was his explanation for that?
let's see. I'm trying to remember exactly. I mean, I think it did feel a little bit like one of those "do as I say, not as I did" type of type of pieces of advice. I think that he was just sort of pointing out that when you go down a certain path, you can kind of get yourself, I don't know, you get some momentum behind a certain path, and I think he was kind of advising that
Yeah, I
that
mean,
if you spend a little extra time, you know.
yeah, there's definitely truth to that. I mean, I think that like there's definitely this feeling of like responsibility that comes when you take money from investors. That's definitely true. So, yeah, yeah, I'm not going to disagree that once you've committed to something that there is momentum behind it. But I think advice for folks who are in high school, like super young, I would say um, follow your intuition. It's just like literally whatever you think is cool, just like start building stuff there and see where it goes. And yeah, you can't really learn until you actually put it in front of people, actually try and get paid for it, actually try and just we can't learn anything just from talking to each other, right? You have to yeah, see it out in the wild. So yeah, I would
Yeah.
say whatever you have yeah, whatever strikes you, like whatever like makes your eyes light up is the thing that you should just go build now. And if your interests change later, then um, maybe I'm just more reckless. I would just say, yeah, just drop it and go to the next thing. I mean, at some point, you should probably get more serious and like commit yourself to like work on this a specific thing for maybe first 3 years, then 5 years, then 10 years. But I think it's hard as a 17-year-old, as a 15-year-old to think on that horizon, right? I mean, the longest project I ever worked on as a 17-year-old was probably 3 years, which was a nonprofit that I was working on that I started, 3 years,
Yeah.
3 years before. And that felt like, oh, this is like such a long-term project, right? But, obviously researchers, spend, 2 decades, 3 decades, 4 decades working on the same problem, running 1,000 different experiments as new technologies come out and learning what even the right questions to ask are. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I would say like always be building. Like I think always shipping things, always like having a bias toward action. Like your inspiration is perishable, right? So you shouldn't wait till you have enough experience or whatever just to start. I think that there's a
Yeah.
lot of beauty of learning that happens just from starting.
Yeah. I like that. Inspiration is perishable. That's good. Okay, great. We've got about 10 minutes left. We'll try to get through a few more questions. So on your personal website, you list some of your favorite essays, and one of them is The Inner Ring by C.S. Lewis. So
Hmm.
Fergus wanted to ask about that. Why is that one of your favorite essays?
That's so detailed. Um, well, I honestly just think it's really well written. I think that like the writing that I love the most is when a writer is able to distill and make concrete something that is very um, hard to verbalize or hard to even recognize. And I think that what he talks about in the Inner Ring is a concept that I think all of us are um, familiar with or have felt, maybe unconsciously. And I think that the way that he reduced it to writing was just extremely impressive. It had a lot of clarity to it. I think like that's what I aspire to do. I mean, unfortunately, I'm not a writer, but I used to really love writing, in school, and that was the type of writing that always resonated the most with me. Is do you have are you able to take something super amorphous and make it really concrete and precise? And I think that essay does that. It's not really related to Startup Stall, I don't think.
It's
Yeah.
and it's related to life, but
Yeah.
hey, you're right. It is really well written. Okay, great. Lexley asks, do you have any advice for teens who grew up single-mindedly aiming to pursue a traditional career path, but are now considering going down an unconventional route?
Yeah. Um, I think you have to follow your gut. I think that if you're like, I don't know, in your heart and your instinct is to like follow the traditional path, then you should do that. I don't think that just because you see something unconventional and you think people are telling you to do the unconventional thing doesn't mean you should necessarily do it. I think like the point is you should always follow your gut and like trust your gut more. I think that like there's a lot of programming from society, from your parents. I don't know, I guess conditioning is another word that you could use for like what you should want. And I think that the main point I guess I'm trying to make is to like try and find your own like inner compass, your inner gut for like what you actually want to do. I think as a young person, it's really hard to remove yourself from like parental influence or like influence of teachers or influence of people who play like a large role in your life. And I think that I don't think that the right decision is unconventional or conventional. I think the right decision is the one where you're going to be your most authentic self. I mean, you can only fake it for so long, right? Like you can only fake being passionate about something for so long. So it's better to just skip the faking part and just go to the part where you're like, this is what really resonates with me, and just getting in touch with that.
I agree with that. The ideal amount of faking to do is 0. So,
Yeah.
okay. Moving on. Do you agree with Peter Thiel's view that grand vision is conducive to startup building?
What do you mean by that?
So, you know, I don't know how much you've read of Peter Thiel's stuff, but he kind of, he pushes the idea that more founders really ought to kind of like have a big ambitious goal, rather than maybe the opposite of that would be like just trying things and seeing what sticks. Now, Long, who asked this question, sort of hints at something that I've actually always wanted to ask Teal, which is like, this is not at all what you did with PayPal, right? Which is like, they went into PayPal with a totally different thesis, and they pivoted several times, and they were originally going to like beam money back and forth between Palm Pilots, right? Which was the handheld device before the smartphone. And then that didn't work at all. And they ended up doing web payments, which was like totally not what they were expecting. But now Teal says like, hey, everybody, you should really have a big vision and go right after it, rather than try things and see what works. I don't know. So what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of like startup Kool-Aid, and like it doesn't really matter. I don't know. I feel like I don't want to say that like people with experience, like specifically like I think operators, like someone who's actually executed on something, does have like an opinion worth listening to. But I think that there's just constant counterexamples, right? Like there's cases that support this idea that if you have a grand vision, then it's easier for you to build a team around it. It's easier for you to get funding for it, whatever. Like obviously Elon Musk is probably like the canonical example of that. SpaceX, like saying we want to go to Mars, like there's probably nothing more inspiring than like, hey, can we make humans interplanetary? But there's also, I think, counterexamples of like things that start out looking really dumb or really silly that end up being extremely useful, right? I mean, I don't think that, I think, Evan Spiegel, when he started Snapchat, was like running around like the Stanford Shopping Center, like saying, do you want to send a disappearing photo? And everyone was saying, no, like, who cares? Why? Right? Like he could have stopped at that and been like, hey, like I went and talked to 30 people and like 29 said this is a dumb idea. Or you could just be like, no, I think this is cool and I'm going to like keep doing it. And then, I guess like pushing it into existence. So I think that like, maybe that sounds like a non-answer, but I think there's actually some beauty to it, right? Which is that, hey, if you want to work on something, it doesn't have to fit into some mold of like what someone says, like the startup formula or like the success formula is. Like you should just go do it and see where it goes and write your own story, right? Like maybe you're the counterexample to like every other like model that's existed. Like, well, isn't that super exciting? Like that's like definitely something to write about. So I don't know. I think you should just look at that in an empowering way. Like you don't have to fit any mold. Like just go do the thing that you really want to do and just see what happens. Would be my advice.
Great. Okay, another article on your website. So one that you wrote was the neuroscience of free will.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned an argument between psychology professors of, I guess, how to formulate free will, which is I can choose otherwise in the moment or in the future. So Benjamin wants to know, what do you think about this and why?
Oh, do I think free will exists?
Or yeah, and or is it in the moment or is it in the future or both or neither?
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think that I think that from a like experimental perspective, all of these results are super interesting, and I think that the reason why I think they're so interesting is kind of what I wrote about at the beginning, which is that sometimes science and like technical results exactly conflict with what our like sensory experience is, right? Like none of us can like really sense gravity, right? We don't realize that people are we're all stuck to this like giant sphere, right? It doesn't even really make sense that people are on the opposite side of the world are also being like sucked in by gravity, right? Like we don't realize that our hands are are mostly empty space, right? They feel solid, right? But like, we know because of atoms that like, yes, our hands are mostly empty space. So there's all these like extremely non-intuitive things that we as humans, because of like our vantage point, our sensors, can't detect. And that's what I think is interesting, is basically all of these observations about free will are in conflict with our lived experience, right? We all feel like, I have this intention to do something, and then my actually carrying out that action follows the intention. And then what I think is really bizarre and crazy, right, is that all of these experiments show that the opposite is occurring, right? That you can detect what someone will intend to do before they know that they intend to do it. And obviously, like, the research also shows that the belief in the existence of free will affects your actions. So it's obviously beneficial to an individual to have this sense of agency and believe that they do have free will, even if there's like some like early experimental evidence over the last like 10 or 20 years that observes the opposite. So yeah, I don't think I have like a very like firm belief one way or the other about which experimental results are going to pan out. I think that the opinion of the neuroscientists seems to be converging on no, we don't have it in the moment, but maybe we have it in the long term. But I think for me personally, I'm kind of more of a pragmatist. I just want to do the thing that makes me most effective. So kind of I think regardless of how it turns out, I'm always going to believe that I have some agency and effect on it.
All right. Great. That's probably a good note to end on, and we are out of time, so unfortunately won't be able to get to the rest of the questions, but thank you everybody for showing up today, making this a great event, and thank you, Noor, so much for spending the time with us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This was awesome, and thanks so much for putting this on. I think this is like definitely the program I'd want to be in if I was in high school, so I wish I could go back in time and be in your class.
Absolutely. Well, you should sign up for the adult version. It launches this fall.